To have passion in life is everything.
What's your Everest?
Oh,
Is it
yeah.
that 200-inch buck?
They just look so impressive when they're wide.
Especially running away.
Welcome to this week's episode of Eastmans Elevated.
It's like a think tank for outdoor activity.
Sounds exactly like my hunting. Just always thinking about it, always trying to evolve it and make it better.
Here's your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastmans Elevated for you. So this week on the podcast, I have back on Robby Denning. Robby is such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to mule deer. He understands the species so well and their tendencies. He understands the different habitats, the different seasons that go along with it. And so we're able to dive in and have these really in-depth, high-level conversations about mule deer and compare notes. The things we see and the things we recognize, the things we do as mule deer hunters. And so I just really enjoy these conversations, and this is another great one with Robby. So he was given a speech at the Western Hunting Summit about the mule deer rut, and that's what we dive into today. We talk about the mule deer rut in depth. And it's just such a great conversation. I know I learned some things from it. I know you guys will too. I love having Robby on the podcast, so this is a great one, guys. We'll get right into it. I just want to thank a couple of my sponsors. I want to thank Eberly Stock Packs. Eberly Stock builds a durable pack that packs the weight really well, lightweight, and they have all different designs to fit your needs as far as packs. I really like using the kite pack for a day pack or an overnight. It's really lightweight, sits tight to my back. I can stalk and hunt with it on. I can still pack out an animal if I kill one on the hunt. Just a great day pack. I also use their little big top. This is a pack that I'll use for 3 to 5 days. Lightweight, packs the weight well, a minimalist design, just a great pack. I also use the Destroyer. And the Destroyer's a great expedition-style pack. Really sits tight to my back, and I'm able to get 7 to 10 days worth of gear in it. Also, check out their new brand of packs. I used them this year. So this is their Vapor series. It goes on the main frame, and then you can get a 2,500 cubic inch bag, a 5,000, or a 7,500. It also has a meat shelf that you can cinch the meat in between your bag and your frame, which is a great feature for packs. And it's also got a minimalist design where I'm able to get that pack weight down pretty far, but will still pack heavy loads really well. So if you're in the market for a new pack, make sure to check out Eberly Stock. I also want to thank one of our sponsors, Savage Arms. Savage builds some of the best rifles with out-of-the-box accuracy. Just so impressed. I built this rifle last year, this 6.5 Creedmoor, and the thing will just absolutely shoot. They have a bunch of different designs that'll fit any price specifications. Like you can get their base model, and it's still going to be really accurate outside the box. All the way up to like their 110 Ultralight is a favorite between the Eastmans. I love this rifle. This rifle comes in at under 6 pounds. It's designed for mountain hunting. It's super accurate. It's got the Savage AccuFit where you can adjust the comb length and the comb height, which is so imperative to shooting a rifle accurately. It also has the Accu trigger, so you don't have to take it to a gunsmith to lighten up the trigger. You can adjust that trigger. I believe it's 1.5 to 4 pounds on that trigger. So you can set it a little bit lighter for accurate shooting. They also have the carbon fiber wrapped stainless steel cut rifled barrel on it. Just build great shooting rifles. So if you're in the market, make sure to check out Savage Arms. Over at Eastmans, we've got the magazines that are coming out. Just released an article about stalking high percentage animals. That's written in the Eastmans Bow Hunting Journal. You can get both magazines, EHJ, EBJ, for $50 and an outdoor edge knife if you put in the promo code ELEVATED321. You can also get some money off if you're interested in our elite membership, which is a membership to both magazines, membership to Tag Hub, You get all access to our entire video library. We're doing a bunch of hunt giveaways on there, and you can check that out. You can go to Eastmans and then go to the landing page, Brian, and it'll save you a little bit of money on that. That's the Elite Tag Hub membership. Tag Hub is our internet research tool. I've told you guys about it before. It's really been helping me out here in tag season, as I refer to it constantly, for how many points it takes, for success odds, for ratings, like you name it. There's so much information on there. So it's a great resource for Western hunters. So again, that's Eastman's Tag Hub. And with that, yeah, it's nice. Got a bunch of recordings at the Western Hunting Expo, a bunch of great recordings like this one today with Robby Denning. And yeah, I'm just counting down the days till spring. We had a little bit of gnarly weather come back in Montana, 0-degree weather, a little north wind blowing today. But yeah, been getting in good runs. Did a good long one the other day, which is always good to stretch the legs and put on some big miles like that. So yeah, just getting my runs, shooting my bow, getting ready for bear season, and trying to draw some tags. So that's the nature of the beast here. But I want to get right into this podcast. It's a great one. So it's Robby Denning. It's part of Rock Slide. He has one book that's out, another one that's going to be released. Just an absolute wealth of knowledge, great resource for us muley hunters, and I always really enjoy the conversation. It's so high level, in depth about mule deer, and it's just really fun to compare notes with this guy. So really enjoyed the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Barney, Eastman's Elevated. Here we go. All right, I'm live here at the expo. I got one of my favorite people, Robby Denning. So thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, thank you. Mm-hmm. Good to be on here. I saw your podcast schedule. It looks like it's just crazy.
We're recording some good ones. Yeah, we've had some great ones today. We got Jason Matzinger on. We got those guys from Stone Glacier. Do you know them?
Which ones?
Zach
I know
Boughton and Andrew Whitney.
Yep, I know who Zach is. Yep.
Those guys are killers. They
the
live
guys
the
that just
ethos.
Did the film?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good little film too.
Oh, really good film. Yeah, there's a bunch of great guys around the show, isn't there?
Yep, that's why I come.
Yeah.
It's networking in person, still the best.
Yeah. I see. I really wanted to make your seminar. Have you done your seminar yet?
Mine's tomorrow.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'll be tomorrow, 4 o'clock. So if you're around, I'd love to have you.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to sit in and listen. You have it all planned out?
Yeah, talking mule deer rut. It's all about the rut, and I don't think there's a lot of good information out there on the mule deer rut compared to the whitetail guys. Man, you talk to the whitetail guys, they're like, oh, on November 7th you do this, on November 8th you do this, oh, and when the moon's waxing gibbous you do this. And man, I don't hear those kind of conversations among mule deer hunters. In fact, some of the stuff I hear about the rut on mule deer, it's like, that ain't right, you know. And so I've been working on it a couple of months, and I just went through kind of all the misconceptions, some of the stuff that I used to believe on it that have been proven false, and then just how I hunt the rut, and then just tried to kind of define the rut really when it is, because sometimes I'm talking to guys and I can tell they don't even know when the rut really is. I mean, everybody's like, oh yeah, the rut's in November, but there's different things going on. Like this year we had a really early rut. October 20th, I was having guys that I trust. They're like, I am seeing big bucks in the does. We're not talking just head down feeding with the does. We're talking doing the nasty, chasing them down. I mean, they're checking does, and within, by like the 22nd, 23rd, I'm getting pictures of guys that are killing 5, 6, 7-year-old bucks, and they're like, oh yeah, he was with the does at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I couldn't get out till about the 23rd, and sure enough, man, on the 24th, we found a really good buck, probably just looking at his body, 5 to 6 years old. We tried to kill him, but I spooked the does when we tried to stalk in there, and he was right in them. And that's the earliest I've ever seen it.
Wow.
And so that's what this seminar is about, just kind of some of the things I've learned over the years that might be triggering the rut, when we think the rut is. I mean, I've had guys tell me, oh, there's no rut this year. Oh, yeah, it's like a guy missing his wedding night. Come on, there's always a rut. And I compare it to like back when I used to hunt bull elk, is, you know, September 1st through the 5th, yeah, sometimes I'll see big 6 points out feeding on grassy ridges all by themselves. You bugle at them, they'll look at you a little bit, but they're not crazy. But you jump one drainage over, and here's another big 6 with 9 cows. And so what's that all about? You know, and I think it has to do with who's in estrus and who's not. Because those bulls know what that is, and those bucks know what that is. And I've even had a few guys that I trust over the years that have had big bucks around herds of elk in September that are acting ruddy. Have you ever heard that before?
No, I've never
heard
heard
it from
that.
a couple of guys that are like, yeah, I saw a big old buck, and he was, he didn't dare get close to the cows because the bull was there, but, he's lip curling, he's smelling the air, and I really think that's kind of what sets it off. So we got to really key in on the does. What are they doing? That has a lot to do with the rut. But anyways, just to sum it up, broke it down from early rut, we just talked about that, peak rut, which in my journals, I think is at November 10th to the 30th. But then late rut, that's a good time to hunt too. And I know you late archery hunt, so we should talk about this. But from the guys I talked to as I was putting this article together, I was confirming, and I've seen this with my own eyes, bucks actively courting does clear to the 3rd week of December. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're speaking my language. I love the rut. It is a great opportunity to hunt mule deer, and so thrilling and exciting. And it's more of a, at least me with the bow and arrow, it's more of an aggressive hunt. Like when I see them, I have to make plays on them because they might be miles away the next day. But I absolutely love the rut. So yeah, I do find like it seems like the farther south, the later the rut happens. But I hunt a spot in Idaho, and it used to be all general season late archery where I could hunt multiple different units. But there's a unit that I can hunt there in Idaho that doesn't open until December 1st and goes to December 31st. And I've seen bucks rutting the last day of December.
Isn't that incredible?
And rutting does hard. And just like you said, like I like it early. I like that pre-rut. So you're totally speaking my language because I love focusing in and honing on the rut and hearing input and insight from other guys that love to hunt the rut like you do. So that pre-rut, what's strange is you saw guys with rutting deer early where I was hunting. I did not see much rut activity. And so like what I can't like pre-rut, these bucks are still hanging in bachelor groups, but when I start to really key in on the pre-rut, I find that these bucks, they start to run solo, or they start to run 1-2 bucks. They start to travel country. They start to look for does. And I've actually caught some of my biggest bucks in that late October when it doesn't seem like the rut's going on. You may look at 5, 6, 7 groups of does and not see one buck chasing, but all of a sudden you run across one of these great big bucks and he's rutting these does late in October. It's actually one of my best time frames for bucks. And like this year, I ended up arrowing a buck late October, keying in on that pre-rut activity, and this buck was hanging with another buck, and it almost seems like they start to stage like by their rutting grounds. Like they make a big move in that late October to the rutting grounds or close to them and start hanging out and start taking interest. So yeah, I love all the stuff you're talking about.
Yep, that's been my experience too, and I think that's why if you're not paying attention to what's going on, it can be a frustrating time to hunt.
Yes.
Because it's like all I'm seeing are does, because that's the other thing too. I don't think we pay enough attention to the does when we're rut hunting. The does, if you notice, you go from like September, there's a doe over there and a fawn, there's 2 does and 2 fawns. But what happens at the end of October? They all get in groups, right? You start seeing these doe groups go from 2 or 3 to 5, 7, 10, and that just increases as you get into November. You start to see does, 10, 12, 15 of them together. That's just more estrus together. So, but moving back to that late October time, I think when those does are still fairly spread out, that means your estrus is spread out. So you may not see a buck doing anything. Like you said, you could look at 5 or 6 groups of deer and there's no bucks around, and then all of a sudden here's this big ruddy buck, nose to the ground right in there, and so I'm always trying to watch the does and spend time around them. I don't just hunt late October. I don't just hunt the does like in November I do. I mean, I'm their neighbor. I'm their new best friend because I know that's what's going to bring them around. But like late October when you killed that buck last year, I just try to make sure I'm around those areas where those does are, but not just keying in on just them.
Yes.
But you mentioned they'll move closer to the rutting grounds. I totally agree with all that. And yet like in my younger years, I'm still back off on some 10,000-foot peak. Like, wow, where's the bucks? I mean, I can't find any. And, you maybe find one or two just enough to make you think, oh, they're up here, but they're hiding. No, they have pulled out. They are getting ready for those does. And like this year, confirmed bucks breeding does the 20th of October. That's just mind-boggling to me that they're already in there. So, if I'm packed in up some drainage 10 miles, and there's a lot of those does don't spend a lot of time in the backcountry late because they got to get the fawns to the winter range, right?
Yep.
That's what's driving it. They got to get those fawns to the best habitat, best place, best possible scenario to survive. So I look back over the years, I spent so much time late October in areas that really didn't have that many deer, but I'm still like thinking, well, there's bucks up here in September. You know what I mean? But they've moved by then.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'm going on, but that's kind of what my seminar is about.
I love it. Yeah. Well, and you're right that that late August, September, or really all through the summer, that summer range that changes. Like early in September, they move to that secondary living, and so you're hunting them a lot in that secondary living and looking that, and then they transition to that pre-rut and those rutting grounds. And at first, they're bachelor groups, and it's like you got to look over 50 different canyons to find the one canyon that they're in and that they're living in. But then I love that pre-rut, and sometimes it's late October, sometimes it's the first few days in November, and you start to see a change. And all of a sudden, you're starting to see all these solo bucks, and they're starting to cruise country, and that is a great time to catch them. And then we move into the peak rut, which is so fun to chase.
That's when it's just crazy.
Oh, the big bucks make mistakes. And that is like what you're saying, really keying in on the does. And it's not like I'm going to camp on one group of does, but I like finding these drainages that hold 20 does or 30 does, and then the next drainage over holds 20 or 30 does, and these bucks just start to travel through those places. And I actually find, like in high pressure areas, you got to be careful at which does you key into. Like hunting does that are around a road, and all of a sudden you found 20 does. Like, it's only going to be young bucks that are going to rut those does, because if a buck's going to grow up to live to be 4, 5, 6, 7, those bucks that we're trying to target, they have rutting grounds as well where they don't get shot out of, where they don't get seen. And so I really think they key into this country that's just over a ridgeline or tough to glass, or maybe you got to hike a little bit back into it. But I love finding the rutting grounds that are away from the pressure in the roads. Do you also focus on that?
Yes, and I call them secure does. You gotta hunt the secure does.
Oh, I love that.
And you get fooled by these ones that are down there off the county road that are, back at the, behind some guy's field, and you can see them, and, but everybody's hunting them and stuff. A big buck is not going to feel good about going in there. He may be in there at night, but if it's public ground, if it's over the counter, he's just going to get shot. He won't even make it past 1 or 2 years old. And plus, I think that's where a lot of the misconception comes from. A lot of guys I talk to, and I used to think think that the young bucks do the breeding first. But I think that's just a function of there's a lot of young bucks, right? There's way more young bucks than there are old bucks in every herd, no matter how it's managed. And so that's just a function of just more young bucks around the does. And those young bucks know what that smell is. They know what that hormone is. And so when you're hunting these does that are, down in easy country and everything, all that's left are little bucks. Big bucks aren't there. So you're just naturally going to think, oh, yeah, the little bucks are the ones doing the breeding. I used to say this. I've had friends say this, that, oh, yeah, the big bucks rut late. No, they don't. They'll rut first if they're around those does. And I've seen it. That Broken Heart buck I killed in 2009, that buck was in the does October 27th and as hardcore as he would have been on November 15th. The only difference was there was only a couple of does in heat. He didn't hang around. I actually didn't kill him until the next year after I saw this. He didn't hang around, but he was in there checking them. But they were that was on private property. So there was only a couple of us that had access. Nobody was hunting that morning, and he just felt secure around them. But yeah, I'm with you. You can spend a lot of time on the wrong does, and I think talking to a lot of guys, I think they do.
Yes.
Because they're like, man, all I saw was spikes and forkies, and we saw 300 deer, and I never saw a big buck. I'm like, man, where are you hunting, dude? There's gotta, even in the lamest herds, there's gotta be a nice buck around there somewhere, so anyways.
You're spot on. They find these rutting grounds where they can go, where they're undisturbed. And, some of the best places in these high-pressure areas are like my backpack spots. Like I hunt this roaded area, 300 square miles of great mule deer habitat, and the deer numbers aren't spread out throughout. There's pockets of deer in different places. But I kind of find like land bridges, like it's the new wilderness to me is like state and BLM. Stuff that isn't marked wilderness, and there might be roads in there, but there's no access to it because it crosses, private land. And I search hard for these areas, and people might discount them because they see a 2-track, but you can't get to the 2-track because it crosses private. And then I'll just take my backpack and I'll go hike in these areas, and it's amazing the number of mature deer that I'll find in these areas during general rifle seasons in these places. And these deer have just found a niche in the country. They found a place where they can survive come rut every year, and they don't get shot with rifles because they don't get that much pressure. But I love finding these little hidden wildernesses like this state and BLM and even national forest, but just being creative with the access points and where I'm hunting to see that there isn't much access, or that you got to hike into it, and those spots are gold mines for me. And it's night and day from the spots next to the road. And you might see a lot of does next to the road, but you're right, you're seeing a lot of smaller bucks, and these big bucks, they get rutting these does in these secluded areas.
They have to, or like you said, they wouldn't be 4 or 5, 6, 7 years old. There's no way. And the all they need is just something, whether it's the management, number of licenses, or something that raises the bar to entry. Maybe that's like what you said. There's some private land in the bottom. There's no way to get around there. You got to come in from the top, but it's only 1.5 miles in. All they need is just a little something like that. Right before this podcast, you and I were looking at that picture of that buck on that guy's phone. You didn't catch at the beginning of that conversation. That buck lived right above a dirt road, and they could hear people on the dirt road, and yet here's this 30, 31-inch buck walking around up there, just a giant of a buck. And he's like, he was there for 3 weeks because that mountain was 40 degrees, and nobody's going to walk straight up that from a road because they're like, oh, there's nothing up there, and plus it was brushy. But that's all that buck needed to survive in there. And so yeah, you call it a niche in the country. That's really all it is. You don't need to be back on the furthest, highest peak. And in fact, these days, that's where everybody is. So sometimes you're better off to be in some of this front range stuff. You remember Jim Zumbo? I remember him back in the 80s talking about these state and BLM little pieces and everything. And I didn't even believe him. I was totally into the national forest, and 30 miles in, that's how I was thinking back then. And yet he was like, oh yeah, no, I find all these big bucks living in this, these little square miles of BLM that are between 2 pieces of state, and the only way you can get through it is either hike in from another spot or get private access. And you know what? That old guy was right, man. Over the years, as I hunted more, I thought, yeah, there's so much country I'm just driving by. That probably has big bucks in it, and I'm too romanticized to be back as far as I can go, which can still be good. I do that stuff too.
Me too.
Because usually the further you get from the road, the better the age class, not necessarily the better the hunting. But anyways, we're singing the same tune.
Yeah, no, it's spot on. Yeah, and I see that, the rut can be different where it starts. Like, heck, I hunt the really good peak rut January 15th down in Arizona. It happens way later down there. But it seems like in my neck of the woods up north in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, I really see that rut kick off that beginning of November. And the dates can change. It can be anywhere from November 1st to last year. It really seemed like it was November 7th, 8th before I really started seeing rut activity, before I started to see these bucks break off in singles. And the rut's good because like prior to the rut, you got to look over 50 or 100 drainages to find the one drainage where the bucks lie.
Are, right.
But it seems like once that rut starts, all these bucks get spread out throughout the landscape. They're not running in bachelor crews anymore. They're running in singles, and they're covering a lot of country looking for these does. So Like, it can turn country where you never see a buck September, October. There's never one in there. You couldn't find a good deer to save you, but all of a sudden the rut comes, and that place comes alive with bucks, working those does in there, you know. So finding these key rutting grounds that are away from pressure, good population of does, and I like to find like good population of does that are living in these drainages and figure out how I can glass it, how I can look at it, and then get in there during the rut and see what kind of bucks are moving around. What are some of your tactics that you use once the rut kicks off? Are you using vantage points? Are you changing vantage points, rolling through country, using a mobile vantage point, or does it depend where you're hunting?
Because I'm mostly a firearms hunter. All my archery hunting is early. I'll hunt the early season with my bow. After that, I switch over to rifle and or muzzleloader if I draw a muzzleloader tag, because there's still a few rut opportunities for muzzleloader, and you have a chance of getting a tag. So because I'm able to reach out and touch them, 100 yards and beyond, I don't spend as much time glassing as what people might think. Now, early archery season, absolutely. Number one technique. I hate still hunting with a bow. I mean, the only time I'm still hunting with a bow is if I blew a stalk or I just lost track of him and it's the only way to get in there. No, I want my eyeballs on that deer. But once you get into hardhorn and the rut, and this is, I think, one of the big misconceptions with the rut. People think the big bucks are dumb and they're just running around out in the sagebrush. Well, some places, but not usually. You got to get in the cover where they're at. So I always start my day glassing. It's still my number one technique in the rut, definitely. But I am not sitting on the vantage point for 5 flipping hours. No way. That's more like early archery season. So let me answer the question by breaking the rut up. So we have the early phase of the rut, which in my book, October 20th to November 9th. Okay, that's what I call the early phase. Okay, they're rutting. They're definitely around the does, though maybe not every doe has a buck, and but they're all the stuff that we talked about. I'm watching does, but I'm also still looking at more classical buck country, higher ridges, stuff like that, because not all the bucks have pulled into the does. Okay. And something's going on with the mule deer diet in October that I'm still learning about, but I think we don't think about it enough. We go through the summer, the deer are heavily eating grasses. So the summer fades, they go into herbs and forbs. And then as we get into October, their diet switching more over to the woody browse, the brush, okay? So that early phase of the rut, that's really when the does have hit the brush. If you really pay attention, they're pulling out of the high country. Even if there's no snow, you start finding them in the brushy draws, the brushy country. And I'm talking all the different varieties of brush. Ceanothus, antelope bitter brush, serviceberry. I mean, there's dozens of varieties of them. And that has to do with that's what they're trying to eat at that time. But because all the bucks haven't pulled into that, some of them are still in the high country. So I'll spend probably more time glassing marginal stuff that this is just buck country, but I don't spend the whole day there either. No. I'm trying to switch between the two. And then I just know somewhere after Halloween, as long as it's not 60 degrees, and especially if you're getting low barometric pressure and you're starting to get storms, you don't have to have 3 feet of snow, but if you're getting a dusting of snow and ice, it's cold, low barometric pressure, those bucks are active, and I'm really keying in on those does then. I mean, I'm like, usually by then I've got a little inventory of does. Okay, there's does over here on this piece, 2 miles up this road, there's some does over here. If I'm packed in somewhere, I'm like, okay, I got to hit this trail this day. I got to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning this day because I'm going here. Or, I can sleep till 7 that day because I'm just hunting up the ridge here. But I'm purposely going to the does after Halloween. I really spend a lot of time with them. I'm not expecting these bucks to be solitary up on some high country ridge like I would have maybe a week or two before. Okay, and so then when we get in after November 10th, I'm glassing. It's always your number one technique, but what I'm trying to get at is if I ain't finding them, I'm not just going to sit on the knob and freeze. They're leaving tracks on the ground. We usually got snow by then. And so sometimes I'm just walking around likely country and I'm looking at the ground. And this is the other thing too. I think whitetail hunters will camp on a scrape or a rub for a month. Mule deer hunters, we just walk right by them. We don't even pay attention to them. That's sad because I've learned this over the years. That big buck I killed in Montana in 2009, that was directly because I knew I was hunting the rut and I was finding rubs that aged back over the decades. I could just look at the trees and the brush and tell, like, okay, there's a brand new fresh rub. I mean, there's this hair on the ground, and look at that rub. That's like years old. I was seeing that kind of stuff, but it was really thick. You couldn't glass it. You just, typical Northwest Montana. And so rather than, I'd glass in the morning, half hour, just see if we catch anything out, definitely. But then after that, I'm headed in the weeds where they're at. And it's not fun. I mean, you spend a lot of time still hunting and hunting in the cover with no action. I mean, it's hard. And a lot of times, even when you see them, you don't get a shot, even with a rifle. I mean, everything happens fast. But I just have learned over the years, that's where those biggest bucks are, especially if it's not a draw tag and you're competing with other hunters, a lot of the peak rut stuff after November 10th, it's pretty much draw tags, usually, so you don't have a lot of hunting pressure. And so you might catch those bucks out in the open, but I still don't spend all my time out in the open. I don't glass as much as people think I do. As we get into the late rut, which I think starts after November 30th, a lot of the does have been bred, the action's calming down. You can still see bucks chasing does, definitely. But you may see a bachelor herd of bucks. You may see 3 bucks running together like it was early October. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have. Or multiple bucks in a group of does.
Yeah. There's you can just tell nobody's thinking about the honeymoon right now. But then all of a sudden, one ridge over, here's this big old buck, sniffing the ground, running a doe over the ridge. It's kind of both at that time. So by that time, I'm actually glassing a little bit more, and on average you've got more weather by then, more snow has fallen, and the deer have moved even closer to their critical deer winter range, where early rut in early November they may still be on the big mountains, and even peak rut mid-November to late November, they're transitioning, but they've still got pretty high deer. Usually by the time I get to December, the deer are about as low as they're going to be for the year. So it's typically big glassable country, and then a lot of this winter range will have high open ridges around it, and the does are, they're focused more on the brush. That's why I talked about their diet and everything. Where these bucks I think bucks still like to see more than the does. I mean, they just think about where they live. They on average they're higher up. They want to be on the ridges. That tells me that they want to see. There's something about it. So on the later archery hunt, I actually am glassing a lot more, maybe even like I would be in the early archery hunt, although it's so flipping cold you can't sit very long. No. But, I really am watching those openings, because those bucks, by that time, they're worn down from the rut. I think they go back to feeding a lot.
Yes.
I've watched these bucks, Brian. That Montana buck I told you about, when I skinned him, it was November 23rd. Dude, he looked like a bodybuilder. He had no fat on him. And I aged him, he was 6.5 years old, healthy. I mean, that buck probably had 2 inches of fat on him before he started the rut. But I've seen these bucks just get skinny through November. I mean, they're just running hard. They don't stop. But they get into December, and all the does are going out of estrus, or they've been bred. And I think they're starting to rebuild their bodies, and so glassing can actually be pretty good then. And you're with the Eastman boys. I mean, that's kind of how they made their name, going out on the winter ranges, glassing all these big bucks. And later in the year, the rut's not really going and everything. They're highly visible. So I try to take advantage of that too, and spend some more time glassing then.
Gosh, such great information. Yeah. You're so right. As it gets into the rut, like, I find myself using similar tactics where I still glass a lot. Like you say, it's my primary way that I find and hunt these deer. But I also find, like, even though the bucks can be moving all day, I find that once I get on the vantage point, I kind of see all the deer that are around within 20, 30 minutes, where there's not a bunch of new deer popping out. And maybe every once in a while, if I'm on a great vantage point, I'll stick it out for an hour, hour and a half. But I tend to see the deer that are around and the bucks that are around, take inventory, and then I almost want to use that morning light or that morning movement, and I want to start traveling through country and use almost like a mobile vantage point where I'm not quite still hunting the thick stuff like you mentioned there, but I'm still hunting through and just getting different angles on the country, looking back into different canyons, different faces, and I'll just pick out different deer and maybe find that group of does where that buck's at. And same thing as I get into that late season as well, as I feel like I don't need to sit on a vantage point for 4 hours. Like, I need to sit there for 20 to 40 minutes, pick it apart, see what deer are around, and then almost start moving my way through country and just getting different angles on it in different positions and continuing to glass. But I'm almost walking, and when I get to a good spot or any new opening I can see, I'm picking it apart with my binos, trying to turn up some deer. and then as I move through, like I tend to just find deer, and I will hunt. Like the rut is great for hunting all day long. It seems like there's deer movement throughout the day. And I also like what you mentioned about that cold weather. There is something about the cold, or it doesn't even have to be deep snow like you mentioned, but that barometer, like it starts dropping or it gets cold, and that rut seems to really ramp up. And I love to be there at the beginning of that peak rut, like you said, November 9th. Like November 5th to November 10th, there's a day in there where a switch flips, and it can be a cold weather system, and all of a sudden there's big bucks, and they're everywhere cruising through. And so I really like to hit that early peak rut. But then those peak rut dates that you talk about, it's so fun because you get to see so many different bucks cruising around, and then also like I'm not just looking at the does. Like I'll also catch bucks that are solo this time of year, that have already bred a doe, that are looking for another group of does that are traveling through this country, or I'll see where that buck, like he's not into like he's not going to tend all these does for a week long and wait for one to come into estrus. He's going to move into these does, look for one into estrus, look to breed her, and look to move on. Or I've seen him where he cuts out that hot doe, and so I'll glass a group of does. There's no buck in there, but that buck has cut one of those does off, and I'll find him 200 yards above these does, and he's with one single doe, and he's just chasing her around in the timber, trying to breed her up there. Or maybe he's bedded with her, waiting for her to get up, like he can smell that she's going to be coming into estrus soon. So it's not just glassing the does, like it's being really good behind your glass to look at all those likely spots he can be, because sometimes he's not, with that exact group of does. He's already cut one off, or he's up moving solo. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring it up, dude. That's why I was tamping on my temple. You're very observant. That's high-level deer hunting, and that's what I put in my seminar, because it took me a while to kind of figure this out. What a big buck wants is he wants a lone doe. He doesn't like to be around. We were talking about bachelor bucks in September, how the big ones, sometimes they'll just pull away from that. If that becomes a risk to them, they'll just pull away from it, all right? If it's helpful for them to be in there, they'll hang out with all those bucks. But I see the same thing with the does. I don't think they like being down there chasing all those little bucks off, and here comes another one. I mean, they're distracted too. They don't live that way any other time of the year, right? They're always very deliberate. They're always paying attention. So I think their gold standard is to, when a doe is at the peak of estrus, or whatever they call that in the scientific community, when that egg is dropped and it's ready, okay? He wants her alone. He wants to move her back in the brush and make babies. And I've seen that. And I put that in my seminar, that's where sometimes during the peak rut, I've struggled a little bit, because I'm like, well, wait a minute. It's like November 17th. These big bucks should be going wild, and all I'm seeing are a bunch of juveniles around these does. And then all of a sudden, like you said, I'll pick something up in my glass, like, wow, there's a lone doe over there. What's she doing? Why is she alone? And I get watching her, and boom, here comes Horny Head. And he's with her. He's pulled her away from those. The first time that ever happened to me was about 2000. I was hunting with a friend. He had killed a nice buck, a 4-year-old buck. And he said, dude, I'm just going to go glass for you now. We were in the back country, but it wasn't like high country. It was just you needed horses to get in there. And it was hard to cover country. And he said, rather than just go sit with you and look on the same mountain, he goes, why don't I, head up this drainage? And we had walkie-talkies. He goes, I'll call you if I see something. I'm like, hey, great idea. First morning, we split up. He radios me, and he's like, hey, dude, he goes, I've been watching this doe over here. He goes, there's all these deer down at the bottom of this canyon that we hunted. He goes, I can see down in there. There's deer all over in those Quakies where you said they'd be. He says, but just up above on this ridge, he goes, there's a doe out there, and she's by herself, and she's just bedded. He goes, I don't know what she's doing. I'm just going to keep an eye on her. And I didn't know what was going on. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds good. Just kind of weird, because all the deer are grouped up. And, I'm over on another mountain watching, 6 or 7 bucks chasing does all over the place. Dude, he calls me about a half an hour later. He's like, dude, she's with a great big buck. He's about 28, 29 inches wide. And he goes, I only see him every once in a while. He'll come out, and he'll get her out of his bed. And he did this, I think, twice, he said. And he'll smell the ground, and he'll run her around a little bit, and he goes, then he just disappears, but he won't let her leave. If she tries to leave, he gets her in. That was the first time I ever witnessed that. And by the way, we didn't end up killing that buck. We tried, but And then over the years, I've kind of paid attention. I've seen that several different times. And so I've just, in my mind, I've made up that that's really what they want to do if they can. If they can get a doe in estrus and pull her away from all those fawns and all those little bucks, that's what they want to do. So in the peak rut, don't quit looking for those individual deer. And if you see a lone doe, pay attention to lone does. And this may only happen to you once every couple years. I mean, it's not real frequent that I get to observe that. But I know that if there's a lone doe, there's a reason, and I need to pay attention to it. She may be with the biggest buck on the mountain.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's so spot on. Yeah, and I love, like, when I get to hunt these deer or I locate a good buck that I want to make a play on, it's different than the early season. It's still methodical and slow on my approach, but I'm almost more aggressive, and I take what these deer will give me. And so I move in and then adapt to the situation that I'm given, because it's tough to plan out a stock because by the time I get there, everything's changed. He's ran that doe around to a different spot. The does are in a different area. So I almost find myself like finding a good buck that I want, and he's in a decent spot, or I've got a decent win, and I just start closing in and then adapting to the situation that I'm given. And maybe I've got to get into a couple hundred yards. I have to reassess. I may pull out and wait then and watch him for a while, or maybe I've gotten in where I can use the topography to move in. But really, at that time of year, I think where the bucks get the reputation of throwing caution into the wind is they are focused on breeding does. They are not focused on danger as much, and they can still catch you and they can still bust out. But for the most part, you have to beat the does. Like, it's all the does that are going to see you, or they're going to catch movement. In fact, I chased a great buck this year that I had about killed. I chased him for multiple days. I was actually really patient, passed on the stalk, and I finally got an opportunity. It was during this snowstorm, and I knew where he was at. He was bedded down in these aspens down there, and this was a great buck. He was only a 3. But he just had a giant frame, and he was so heavy, and he had the back tines and big eye guards, and just so heavy and bladed, older bodied deer, where it's just like, this is the deer I want to kill.
Yeah, we like big 3s.
Yeah, and so he was bedded down with these deer, and I had like a ridge line that drew me down into him down in there, and I got down in there, and everything was working out perfect. I was inside 100 yards, checked on him again. He's down there rutting a doe, or maybe he's bedded at that time with the does down in there, and so I kept working this ridge line down in, and now I'm finally to the spot where I'm gonna pop over this ridge line, and I'm gonna get a shot. And so I'm making my final approach, and I jump a doe that's right up in and through
right
there, you know, and she goes over into the herd, and so I kind of hurry to get over the ridge, you know, take my last couple steps slow. They didn't see me approaching, but that one doe had blew up my opportunity in there. Now all the does are on edge. That buck could care less. He's down there trying to breed that doe as those other does are trying to escape, and he tried to breed her the whole way up the hillside.
Every time she'd stop, he'd try to get on. Huh?
Yeah. He could care less about danger. He was into that doe, you know, and so a lot of times that time of year, you got to play the does, and you can't spook them out. And you talked about becoming friends with the does. It's really important not to bust those does out of there.
Totally.
It's got to be low
your
impact.
does.
Yeah, if you start spooking those does out, that rutting ground is gone. Like, they'll start disappearing out of there. So you really got to be low impact and work really hard not to be spooking does while you're hunting the rut.
Yep, I've learned to never say, "Oh, it's just a doe."
Nope.
Now, not during that time of year.
Nope.
No, man, they will tell on you, and it'll ruin it. If you can figure out ways to stay back from those secure does and find ways to look at multiple ones, multiple groups like that a day, you're going to turn over a better buck. You just are. I've done it for 30 years. I know what's going to happen. When I run into guys, Colorado was really warm on third season this year, and a lot of guys were kind of down in the mouth about it, but I'm like, hey, I'm still seeing just bucks going nutso the first half an hour of life. So make sure you're not still driving down the road or hiking in somewhere and you can't see your deer country. You need to be where the deer are. Build on your knowledge base every day. And it's a lot of times we think opening day is the best. It can be, but sometimes you don't know enough about your area yet. Even if you've hunted it before, the deer aren't always in exactly the same place. But hey, if opening day was kind of slow, but hey, I inventoried some does up in this draw. Okay, the next morning, It's supposed to be 60 degrees tomorrow. You can't be getting up there at 7:30. You got to be there before first light. I mean, it needs to be a little dark before shooting time. You need to be there because if there's a big buck in there, it's probably that first half an hour, 45 minutes that you're going to see him. And if you're late, and it's warm weather like that, even in the peak rut, because Colorado's third season ran until November 13th this year. 19th.
Wow, those are good dates.
Yeah, dude, it was killer dates, but it was still tough.
Yep.
Midday, tough. You talked a minute ago about hunting all day. Peak rut is about the only time of the year that I actually hunt all day long. About the only time, most of the days. The early season, the days are so long. I may not go back to camp, but, I'm taking a nap on the hill, stuff like that. But peak rut, the days are short, 9 hours long, and you can see bucks moving throughout the day. But when it gets warm like that, it's still dang slow in the middle of the day for the big bucks. You can't sleep in. Mm-hmm. And you got to stay out till the last seconds of light. I mean, this stuff sounds basic, but I'm still amazed at how many times as a younger person I quit, and I still see guys that are, they're headed back to camp, and dude, guys, the sun's just went down. The best half hour is right now, especially with this warm weather. Mm-hmm. So, anyways.
No,
you're
so spot on. Like, it does seem simple. I was going to say the same thing. It seems like basic knowledge hunting mule deer, but guys get worn down, or they don't see any deer that day, and they just start coming back a touch early. And you couldn't be more spot on with your advice. The right places at the right times. You've got to hike with your headlamp. You've got to stay out late. It's so important, that first half hour, that first hour. There's so much deer movement, and you can't be hiking into your spot. You can't be driving your spot because you might miss it. Yep. And two, maybe you do see some deer when you get up there at 8, 9 o'clock. Maybe you see some does, but you have to see all of them. You have to take inventory. Yeah. That one big buck can be with one group of does that put away 15 minutes after light, and you missed them because you weren't there on time, and you still get there and still might find 20 deer and find some small bucks and thinks, oh, there's no big bucks in here. And no, you just missed them. You weren't at the right place at the right time. Have to be disciplined. And as I've gotten older, I haven't missed a morning hunt in 20 years.
Awesome.
I never
you
sleep in.
You just know you can't sleep.
You can't sleep in.
You gotta be out there.
And you've got to be out there till that last light. I never miss the evening. I just know how important it is day in, day out. And just like you said, you're gathering information too, where you're seeing deer, where you're seeing them move, and maybe sometimes it's where you don't see a big buck and to move on, but you've got to be there in that first half an hour to rule it out. Otherwise, you can't rule out country.
You can't, dude. You're exactly right. And I've made all those mistakes as a young person. I really did. And now it's not that I hunt perfectly, but I just try to make sure that those are kind of the non-negotiables. And Colorado was so warm this year that there was days I wasn't hunting all day. I was headed back to camp, make lunch, take a little nap, head back out about 3 or 4 o'clock. And I want to talk about moon phase too. And but make sure I was getting back into those areas. And the area I was hunting, you didn't have to hike anywhere more than a mile, but you had to be there at the times they were up. I just read it in a biology book here a year ago. I think I got the word right. Deer are crepuscular, and that means that they move in the twilights. That's like a biological definition of deer worldwide. You can find it in the scientific journals. And obviously, but if you really think about that, and you really think about big buck behavior, there has been so many big bucks I've seen over the years, Brian, that would only come out when the sun was down. So that's an hour a day, right? It's the only time you can see. When the sun is down, you get a half an hour in the morning and a half an hour at night. And some of those bucks, that's the only time they come out. And we're not even talking about rut. We're talking, as soon as they rub their antlers, that's the only time that you see them. So, you can't miss those times. You really can't. And sometimes, as a younger person, I'd get a little lazy during the rut. I'd be thinking, oh, man, all the cards are in my favor. These bucks are going to screw up. No, you still got to hunt right. Mm-hmm. If you want to get the best one, you got to hunt right. Let's talk about moon phase a little bit.
Oh, I'd love to.
That was something else I dove into. I've had a lot of people ask me about moon phase over the years, and just going back over the 25, 30 big bucks I've killed some big bucks on the full moon, and about 10 years ago, I was kind of just not even worried about it anymore. I'm like, well, the moon's the moon. The moon is, when the moon's, if it's up on opening day, I'm still going to go, But as I started putting together this article about the rut and looking back through my journals, I did come up with some tips, I think, that will help people during the rut. And then reading the whitetail literature. There was a great whitetail researcher. His name's Charles Alsheimer. I think we just lost him last year. Studied the whitetail rut for like 40 years, and a lot of good information. You had talked about the rut getting later as you move south. He actually defined that line as the 35th parallel. That's a line that goes through about north central Arizona, Southern California, New Mexico, kind of across that line. And that's what I've seen is north of that line, all these dates that we talked about line up. On October 20th for the early rut, November 10th for the peak rut, December 1st for the late rut, something like that. But when you move below the 35th parallel, it just spreads out. So back to the moon phase thing, when we're trying to hunt deer during the rut above that 35th parallel, and we want to catch the most rut action, because a lot of guys aren't like us. They don't hunt 35 days a year, 50 days a year, 60. You know, they got the weekend off. They got to make the most of it. Looking through my journals and paying attention to moon phase and just thinking back, this is what I've noticed. If there's a full moon during any of those phases of the rut, so early, peak, or late, I've seen it shut down the rut activity in the mornings. So we were talking about, got to be there at that first half hour light. That's a non-negotiable. You still got to do it even when there's a full moon. But it helps me with my mental game to know if there's been a full moon last night, everything's just more active during the full moon. That's just all there is to it. And even though these bucks run themselves ragged, they still rest during the rut. I find them bedded and all that stuff. And I find after the full moons, the mornings can be really slow. I just don't see a lot of rutting activity, and I think that's just a function of the bucks are tired. The does are tired. They've eaten longer during the night under a full moon. I mean, research has shown that, so they go lay down early. So there's been a few times I think I've burned some days thinking, oh man, the rut is just so slow, the full moon, and then I miss the afternoon for whatever reason. I just don't go out that night or whatever. But what I've learned is when that rut action is turned off in the morning, you can expect some phenomenal afternoons. And I've seen that pick up as early as 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a full moon, that all of a sudden, boom, the deer are up and moving. And, they've laid down before daylight. They've got 6, 7, 8 hours of rest. They've gotten up and eaten during that time, but they've stayed in the brush. But now they've moved out of the cover, and the bucks, and this is, I think, what's driving it, those bucks are like, they got some rest, and they're ready to rock and roll, and they're out there and they're chasing those does. And so Colorado this year, we had that moon, and that was tough, but our afternoons were still awesome, dude. I was seeing killer rutting action in the afternoons, 2, 3 o'clock, full sun. Bucks out of the cover, just chasing does, where, we were in here this morning, we didn't even see a buck. So you kind of want to think about that with that full moon, is it may cause the morning action to be slow, but just expect more action in the afternoon, because this is what you got to remember, is the rut is still going to occur. It's how God made them. It's the survival of the species.
Yes.
There's going to be these different intensity levels, and I think that's what throws us off.
Yes.
Like there was no rut this morning. Oh, there was a rut. It was just low intensity. But you can expect higher intensity in the afternoon. And then the same thing or opposite with the dark moon. I've seen dark moons, fantastic mornings. Daylight, oh my God, there's a group of deer over there. There's a big buck right there. There's a 4-point right there. I mean, just everywhere you look, and they're all chasing does. And this can be early rut, it can be, peak rut, can be late rut, but then the afternoons can get real slow. And I think it's the same thing. They spend all that energy in the mornings, they're tired, and then they just kind of go lay down for a few hours. They may not get up till right at dark. So it's probably not a formula you can use for every single day, but it's something to think about. And as I kind of put that together, I thought, I think of years ago when I just used to go out and hunt in the mornings. Mornings are best, and I would pay no attention to the moon. But I was like, no, sometimes mornings aren't the best. Sometimes evenings can be fantastic if you've had a full moon.
This is amazing information. I mean, to be honest, I always think the moon is a bit hocus pocus, but I just haven't looked back at my journals. That's why you're such a great mule deer hunting resource, is that you've looked back in your journals and you've found correlation between activity and the moon phases. Because and guys always talk about moon phases for elk, and sure, I notice, they do feed more at night. I definitely notice that during a full moon, but I haven't been able to tie any correlation to it. But to hear you're a guy that's so invested in hunting big mule deer, or this correlation that you found, and like you say, still going to hunt mornings, still going to hunt afternoons, but now I can tie that to some of my own hunting and being at the best vantage points for an afternoon or for a morning, determining what's going to be best and really put my emphasis and effort into that spot during that time frame. That's amazing. That's amazing insight, and I know there's something to it, and like just with your findings, like I'm definitely going to take note of that, and that's something that I learned today. That's amazing information.
Yeah, well, pay attention to that.
I will.
And that's what I'm trying to do with this whole seminar tomorrow, is get the conversation going. I don't want to make it sound like I've got the definitive information on the mule deer rut. These are things I've noticed, and I really would like to get the conversation going with experienced mule deer hunters like yourself. And hey, what do you see? What do you think? And just today, like you said, well, wait a minute, I've seen some bucks chasing does clear till the end of December. You know, I mean, like, they're thinking, well, I haven't, but then again, I don't spend a lot of time out there at the end of December. So there's one more chunk of information that just tells me there's estrus does in December. And it's exactly what I said before. These bucks know what sex is. They're not going to let that doe go unbred. And you know what? I think a buck would breed a doe in June if she came into estrus, you know. And so, anyways, all this stuff that we're talking back and forth, that's what I hope to get out through the podcast and the seminar and everything is just the whitetail guys are kicking our butts on this stuff. They've got so much more information on that. Charles Alsheimer, go look him up. He wrote for Deer and Deer Hunting. It's a magazine, it's a website now. For years, there's so much stuff on there. He could even tell you when the rut was going to start with good accuracy, and it had to do with the second full moon in October. And what he found is if the second full moon in October, I don't want to quote him exactly because I don't remember it, but it was like if it occurred around the 20th, 25th, you could expect a really early high-intensity rut that year, where if it didn't occur until after the 1st of November, the rut was more drawn out. And I don't want to go into any more than that because some of it, I just don't understand. But, I mean, just reading the guy's stuff, I'm like, none of us mule deer hunters are talking that way, right? Like we're not even thinking on that level. Yet he proved it again through his research, and he had a captive herd of deer too that he tested this stuff on, and he was a hunter. He was a good hunter, and he would go out and test it on the deer. And dude, he wrote volumes on that stuff. So that's all I'm trying to do is get us caught up. And that's why when I'm talking to my whitetail buddies, they're looking at the moon phase charts and they're looking at all this stuff. I'm like, man, I'm just going hunting. I got to be leaving a lot on the table here. So, anyways.
It's so fun to compare notes, and especially with a guy like you that lives for hunting big mule deer. And I learn something every time I talk to you, and whether it's contrasting ideas or similar things that we run into. Like that late rut, and I hunt a lot of the elk rut as well. And what I find is that the peak of the rut, the peak of the elk rut is from the 15th to the 25th. They rut really hard, but I really see that rut ebb and flow. Like I will see an elk or a big bull that will be feeding by himself during the middle of the rut because he just bred those cows so hard the night before, bred them, and he's tired, or maybe the cows aren't in estrus because they come in and they come out, and I'll see him just feeding on a hillside. But then the reason October is so good to me for hunting elk, and they continue to rut in October, and the reason why is that the cows that didn't get bred during that first cycle of estrus, 30 days later they come back into estrus again. So this is what makes those dates in October so good, is that they come back into estrus. Now the rut changes a bit, and I find this correlation between deer and elk, as during the later rut seasons it seems like bigger group of elk, it seems like bigger group of deer, and there might be multiple bucks in that group, but I find them that they'll rut in that December, and I really think that they're catching second cycle does that didn't get bred the first time around in November. 30 days later they come into the rut. So I actually have pretty good rut hunting, I mean, all the way through December in a lot of these units. One of my units is open to December 10th, and I see rutting activity till the day it closes. Another one closes December 31st, and this is above that 35th parallel that you're talking about, which is spot on, by the way.
It's like north central Arizona and then across the United States.
I can hunt northern Arizona and run into really good rut in December, and no rut in January, but I go to central, to southern New Mexico or Arizona, and they tend to rut more in January. But I do think it's these does coming into a second cycle estrus, but I look for bigger groups. It's like more a combination between winter range and rut hunt that time of year. As the bigger groups, maybe multiple bucks, and they're just hanging around looking for that one doe that's going to come back into estrus. But yeah, it's always amazing sitting down with you. And I saw you have a new book out.
I do. It'll be out here later this spring. I just sent it to the editor. I pushed the send button on it a week ago. Oh, man, it felt good to do that. Brian, I was writing 10,000 words a week there for a couple of weeks, and it was just wearing me out and trying to work my regular job and everything. But, I released my first book in 2015. I've really wanted to do another one since then. And, dude, honestly, Rockslide just got so busy. And I finally just had this little opening this fall. I actually started the book during hunting season, just some of the breaks I had between hunts and everything. Because, you come home, you're fresh. You probably do that after a hunt. You're fresh. You write a few things down, like, oh, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to write this. And that I wrote this book just like I did the other one in just a couple of months. And so yeah, that'll be out later this spring. It's called Hunting Big Mule Deer, the stories. My first book was Hunting the Big Mule Deer, How to Take the Best Buck of Your Life. It was more tips and tactics.
It's a
stuff
great
like that.
book. I love that book. What a great resource for hunters out there to understand mule deer and cut the learning curve. It's amazing, and I can't wait to read the second book when it comes out
It's
this
just
spring.
long stories. Just big, long stories, and I recruited other writers that helped me. Randy Ulmer's in there, Ryan Lampers, a bunch of my friends that are good mule deer hunters in there, Scotty Thompson, Corey Dixon, Travis Hobbs, good stuff. And I just tried to take a wide variety of hunting experiences and bring them together and then let the stories tell you rather than the how-to. How-to is, do this, step A, here's B, do this. This is just more long-form stories. So I hope it works. I know a lot of guys are, they're scrolling and it's hard to get their attention, but if you like stories like I did growing up, that was some of the writers I really followed, was the guys that put out the stories. I really love to get into the stories. Eastman's Hunting Mag. I mean, that's why it's popular. Because a lot of those articles, that's what they are, stories of the hunt. But these are even longer. I got one story in there that's 12,000 words long.
Wow.
It was an entire hunting season in one story, but it all had a common thread, and that's why it worked. So.
Well, and you can pull gems from these stories, like listening to good mule deer hunters and how they go about hunting these big bucks, turning them up, and how they go about harvesting them. And as you read their written words and as they write it down on paper, you can pull just gems of information from these stories. Right. So yeah,
it just leaves you wanting to read more.
Yeah.
I remember reading some of these stories when I was young, and the story would end, and I was just bummed. I just wanted more, So anyways, that was my attempt to do that. It'll be out later this spring. I appreciate you mentioning it. It'll be on Amazon. At some point, we'll get it in the Rockslide store, but Amazon rules the world, so they're faster at everything. So they'll have it up first.
Well, you're an amazing resource for us mule deer hunters, and I just can't thank you enough for coming on and having these genuine, honest, authentic conversations. Like, this really helps guys shorten the learning curve. So I can't thank you enough. And
thank you very much, brother.
I really enjoy talking to you.
Seriously. Last thing, you're going to be at Western Hunting Summit with Lampers here this?
I am.
Hey, it's in June.
Yes.
June. All right.
Yep.
I'll be there too, man.
Oh, let's
hopefully
hang
we're
out.
on the same weekend. I can't remember what my dates are.
I'm doing all three, so it's going to work
I'll get
out.
to see you. So let's compare some notes then, maybe do another podcast.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah,
okay,
sounds
Bo.
great. Thanks,
God
Robby.
bless you, man.
Yep, thank you. Oh, so fun.
Dude, it was. I love it.
All right, guys, that's the show. Thanks again to Robby Denning. Just an amazing podcast. I always really enjoy having him on. So thanks again to him for taking the time. I know he's busy during those shows and things, so worked out really well to sit down and do a recording. And he did offer to do another one at Lamper's Western Hunting Summit, so definitely going to hit him up for that one. Maybe we can do some early or some mid-season mule deer, or send me your ideas on social media if you have any, what you'd like to see me and Robby record. But just a great man, great guy, great podcast, so really enjoyed that one. Also, I want to thank Savage Arms for sponsoring the podcast, building great out-of-the-box accurate rifles. So make sure to check them out. Again, that model that the Eastmans like so much is that 110 Ultralight. And again, I'm really liking that new 6.5 that I got. The thing is absolutely shooting. So gonna have to try to get after some wolves in the wintertime or something with that thing, shooting really accurately. So that'll be fun. I also want to thank Eberly Stock, building great quality packs. I love that new Vapor series, being able to change out the bags, have the meat shelf in there, and good quality design that packs the weight right. So thanks to those guys. Thanks to Eastmans for their support of the podcast. Again, you can check out Tag Hub. You can check out Beyond the Grid, our internet TV show, and the magazines Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal and Eastman's Hunting Journal. And, yeah, like I was saying in the intro there, just been putting on miles, did a big one the other day, which is always good to push my limits like that. But, yeah, I'm just as hungry as ever for season and preparing for season, really getting excited for spring bear. I missed that January desert hunt, and so I'm definitely getting itchy trigger finger, getting cabin fever, feel like getting out and doing some hunting. So excited for this application season. Got my name in a bunch of hats and just seeing what I can draw. I did see that I was unsuccessful in Arizona. Those results came out today. So just part of it, just trying to draw some good tags here and there and kind of strike out. Would love to get an elk tag there, but it'll come eventually. And trying to get my game plan here for Montana. They made a bunch of rule changes, and yeah, I'm just you know, as these tags get tougher to come by, just have to spend more time on these hunts, and so. Like, my best opportunity to hunt is in my home state of Montana, so I'm really going to make the most out of it next year and making some changes to my hunt strategy. And, you know, I keep myself in such good shape, health, and fitness, and I love chasing these bulls in the mountains, and they build big, heavy, dark horns. And so, you know, looking to really, you know, I hunt the mountains every year, but really looking to focus on the mountains next year. A couple different mountain ranges that I'm thinking about, so I've been scouting those pretty hard. I also, I love hunting muleys during the rut in Montana, but there's a great opportunity to hunt them early as well. And they're not easy in our high country, but they are around. And so I've actually got a high country hunt that I'm planning for my home state here of Montana, and kind of get back to some of my roots there too. I've harvested some good ones over the years in the early season, but it's been a while. So definitely going to go for that, as well as trying to draw some out-of-state hunts. But yeah, just trying to focus in and really study up and get a good game plan for season. Have a lot of my map research done. So I'm absolutely wearing out Google Earth and Onyx and things. And man, it's just a fun process, and it's fun to plan out these hunts throughout the year. And so, yeah, I should have some great adventures coming up that I'm really looking forward to. So hopefully you guys are drawing some tags and making some plans for some adventures this fall and this spring. I guess we're coming up on this spring. Man, I would love to go to New Zealand, but just not in the cards this year. So got to just keep plugging away and save my pennies and maybe get up there the following year. Get through all this COVID stuff. So anyways, just having fun, loving life, getting some work done, and making sure I'm getting that training in, so give myself the best chance at success next season. So thanks a bunch, you guys. I always really appreciate the support of the podcast, the downloads, the shares on social media. It's just huge. And I've got a bunch of new content that I'll be releasing here that I'm really excited to release to you guys. A bunch of photos and videos and things. So just trying to get organized on my side so I can release more of that on social media. So thanks, you guys. Appreciate the support. I'll check in with you next week.